Hello and welcome. In today's webinar, we will discuss whether you know your customers and vendors. We discuss business partner screening in SAP. It's kind of a special webinar for us because we have a special partner, a partner with whom we have built a product together. It's our joint effort. And here with me is Thorsten Gorni from Sanctions.io. Welcome, Thorsten.
Thank you very much, Jens. Glad to be here.
That's great. Introduce yourself and the company.
Yeah, my name is Thorsten. I'm one of the co-founders of Sanctions.io. And what we do is basically we help our customers with their screening needs against international sanctions lists, AML lists, and so on, in order to comply with international sanctions and AML laws and regulations.
Great. So let's have a look at the, let's kind of say definition of what is business partner screening, or some aspects. You can even say it's a very short summary of what we're going to discuss here in more detail in the next 20 or so minutes. So what we're discussing here is how you evaluate and reduce risks that come with the fact that you need business partners, because without customers and vendors and employees and investors, no organization can survive, of course. And there's different types of risks that this business partner screening can address. There is legal and regulatory risk, and let's say that's particularly true for sanctions, which is in the news every day here, in particular in the last 2 years or so. But it also covers operational risks, reputational risks, and you can extend the term a little bit. I don't think it has a very sharp boundary, so to say, but because it is embedded in business processes such as procurement or order to cash, it has many areas where you can say, this is still business partner screening, or is this already something else? One might discuss. I would say let's include master data quality here, definitely, and some other stuff as well. And what you can look at and against what you can do the screening. We have some examples here, sanctions, that's why Thorsten is here, but actually Sanctions.io does more than just sanctions, right, Thorsten? It is a much larger approach that in the meantime you're covering. You started with sanctions, but now you do a lot of other stuff as well.
Exactly. Aside from sanctions and sanctions list screening, we also offer PEP list screening. So PEP, politically exposed persons, is a very essential part for anti-money laundering regulations to comply to those. Aside from that, also adverse media, as you put on the slide, adverse media screening is something that we just recently released that helps basically our customers, or companies in general, to check whether their business partners appear on some kind of negative news, which is very helpful, not only to comply for specific regulations, but also to generally to see what is the risk exposure if I deal with a certain customer with a certain background.
Right. And actually negative events or bad news can be different stuff, right? If it's a customer, it might be bankruptcy because you will not pay the invoice. If it's a supplier, it might be an earthquake hitting the factory and your supply chain is disrupted, something like that, right? We have these types of risks here on the slide. I mean, in the central box, we have legal, which is kind of sanctions, anti-money laundering, bribery. You mentioned that already, but really the other risks are probably as severe. Financial losses due to unverified bank details and you send money there, or also on the revenue side, not making sure that you can actually recognize revenue that you're expecting, or I mentioned the example of disruptions to the supply chain, right? Yeah. What are actually the real consequences if you violate a sanctions regime or a program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, violating a sanctions regime, or basically a specific sanction, is very serious in the sense that, number one, of course, you face legal issues. So, you will get probably prosecuted for that in many jurisdictions. Plus, also, it can basically land yourself on a sanction list, which you definitely want to prevent as a business and also as an individual, because you will face, of course, a lot of issues with your operations if you're on a sanction list. So I think these are the biggest risks. Again, legally, so you face legal consequences plus penalties. OFAC for that instance, the U.S. Treasury Department is really following through with that and is kind of making a good job to follow up and also making sure that people comply. And if people don't comply or companies, then also financial sanctions or financial penalties are involved.
And they're actually public, right? I think if you Google
Exactly.
OFAC actions, there is a database. They publish each case in which they take action against an organization that was found, so to say, guilty of violating a sanctions program. Everything is published. I think for two purposes, so companies can learn about that, but also maybe to show, hey, it's dangerous.
Yeah, I think certainly that too, but also it gives a great opportunity to learn from that. So what were those companies basically facing in their process? What challenges that ultimately led to basically violating the sanctions? And of course, no company or most of the companies, it's not what they want to do, right? That happens because the compliance process maybe is not optimal, or their screening process failed at some point, and these kind of things. So it's a very good source for education, additional education to see what really happened and to learn from.
Right. Our colleague Stefan displayed this slide here. It helps to show where in this SAP security space, if you want, we are today. We did several other webinars already with partners on authorizations and access violation management and procurement and the SAP baseline security template. Today, we are more talking about regulatory issues, but also fraud. And so we are in this area. It is, if we look at the next slide, of course, embedded into business processes. Sorry, maybe the next slide. It is embedded into the business processes such as procurement. This is a picture that shows the different process steps that you have in procurement, from sourcing through purchase order, incoming goods, invoice, payment. So on the one hand, you will need to implement and operate internal controls for a secure IT environment. That's the part here in blue. The SAP system itself with the IT general controls from configuration and secure code and security patches and so on and so forth. And then the business process itself, it has its own internal controls. Sanctions is one example. In the RAMQ platform, we do have many more controls, but some of them we're going to cover today here in more detail also. In particular, screening against blacklists such as sanctions. And we see on the next slide that also that's not something that you do once and then you're good, but the sanction lists, they change. And so how do you do this? When do you screen or when do you do a validation?
Yeah, usually there's basically two processes that you follow with screening as such. One is event driven. So that means, you're onboarding a new business partner. At that point, you perform a screening because you want to make sure that that business partner is not on a sanction list or any other, watch list. Best practice is definitely to perform that kind of screening at the beginning of your business relationship, right? Because that makes sense. So you sometimes even before maybe a lead becomes a customer, it makes sense actually at that point already to perform a screening. So that's what we usually call onboarding screening. And then the next thing is transaction screening. So whenever some kind of transaction is happening, that can be, money goes in or goes out of the company, or product, you buy a product and you purchase something. At these points, at those transactions, it's a good idea also to perform specific screenings, either against sanctions list or any other kind of watch list. And aside from those, again, we call that more like event-driven screening. There's also some kind of continuous screening that is happening, or that is best practice to perform, and that is basically performing a screening in a certain frequency. That can be daily, weekly, monthly, annually, for your entire customer or business partner base. How often you perform that kind of screening depends on your, risk exposure. I mean, compliance professional talk about risk exposure. So, what is your evaluation of your own risk that you carry with that kind of customer or customer group, and that defines basically the frequency of your screening. So, but high level, event driven, or frequency driven, or continuous monitoring, if you will.
Right, and of course we try to automate it as much as possible, all these different things, and we have other examples of things that can be screened or that can be checked in business partner screening. It's not just whether somebody's on a sanction list, but I mentioned already the master data, making sure the master data is correct, because if the master data is not correct, you will never be able to perform a screening. Because
that is actually it's a very often pain point we find when we start implementing a screening solution. The first point to check is, of course, what's the data quality on the customer side, and that includes, of course, how are the names maintained, especially business names. There's all sorts of things that can happen. I think we get to this later.
Yeah.
But so master data management and data quality is, of course, a main driver of, at the end, your screening quality, right? And that influences your compliance process, of course.
Right, and I think something very important, maybe previous slide again, because one box needs to be explained. There is a UBO, unknown flying object. What is UBO? What is a related party, and how are they affected by sanctions?
UBOs are ultimate beneficial owners of a certain entity. So that means basically, essentially, a person who owns shares of a company, or it can also be related companies that have a certain either share in another company or are a subsidiary of some kind of organization. So why is that important? Because depending on the jurisdiction and the specific sanction regime, you are also basically required to not only not do business with people who are specific, or organizations who are specifically on the sanction list, but also, again, depending on the specific sanction regulation, you can also be basically prevented from dealing with connected entities that hold a certain share of that company, which is not mentioned explicitly on the sanction list. So that's why UBO and UBO data is very important to have, either that is basically sourced in the organization. So, one of the best practices there is basically to perform an UBO check on your business partners that, let's say, have a certain importance in the organization. So definitely it's a good idea to request that information directly from your business partner. But of course, you cannot do that probably, if you have a company with, like, let's say, 20,000, 50,000 business partners, it's a very complicated process to do. But again, applying a risk-based approach, compliance people talk about risk-based approach here, and basically do that for your most important business partners. That is definitely a good idea, and also to include that in your screening.
Okay. So if there's two parties, one controls the other, then and one is sanctioned, no matter which one, then immediately both are, so to say, subject to the sanctions, right? And should be.
There's different approaches. For example, OFAC calls that a 50% rule. So if your share is higher than 50% in an organization, then also that includes basically, or that organization is also kind of exposed to that sanctioned or sanctioned regime. In other jurisdictions, there's different approaches. In the EU, I believe it's like 25%. So there's different thresholds. But generally, yes, UBOs is always something to keep in mind, and also to include in the screen.
Yeah, you mentioned OFAC, part of the U.S. Treasury Department that is kind of responsible in the U.S. and not the only party. Actually, there is many sanction lists in the U.S. Right. On the next slide, we have a little bit of an overview on the data that you have. Yeah. Maybe you can explain that. Where does the data come from?
Yeah, in terms of sanctions data, it's quite straightforward, if you will, because sanctions data are usually publicly available data. And in case of OFAC, they actually have a very good mechanism of providing that data to the public. And you can basically go there and download the sanction list and basically include that, in your internal products and perform a screening. So that data, again, publicly available, that is not so much of a, rocket science to source that data. The problem is more then in the next step, how to standardize that data, how to enrich that data. And depending on, again, on the specific jurisdiction we are looking at, for example, in the EU sanction list, the data quality there is very different from the OFAC, data quality, for example. And I'm not saying, which one is better here, but, the thing is basically you even deal with different data quality in different sanctions lists that are provided. So what we do is basically to look at the data, to kind of structure the data, of course, so that all the different sanctions data from different jurisdictions have basically they are standardized in a specific data scheme that we have. And then also we look into enriching data because, as I said, we see sometimes there's data errors that can happen and things like that. So we try basically to eliminate this using different processes, but there's a lot of things that can still go wrong. Even it's easy, the data is accessible, but you have to do a little bit of data cleansing, if you will, as well.
Right. And then you have your database, and I think the number of entries here does not include some other types of data. I know you source data on who is a politically exposed person yourself. There is no available database issued by a government or something like that that says this person is a PEP. There's just a vague definition, let's say, and then
Unfortunately, it is like that. There's some governments that provide so-to called PEP lists, but they are not very comprehensive in most cases. But generally, you can say PEP lists are not provided by a central government agency. So the problem is you have to source the data manually. Manually in the sense, what I mean is, to use different sources. In our case, we tap, hundreds of different sources to basically collect data for our PEP database and to make that available for our customers to screen. So that's a quite different animal than sanctions data in terms of sourcing.
Right. Okay. So one thing is the many different data sources in different formats. I guess sometimes broken files, you need to fix all of that, right? And then you try to match the name in the SAP system with the name in some of these data sources. That's easy, right?
That's what you would think, right? I mean, we are at the end, we live in 2024, everybody is talking about AI and things like that. But indeed, it is still a problem to basically match a name in a database. Why? There's a couple of reasons for that can happen, right? One very common thing is you have a typo in a name and you want to basically, make sure that you still match the name. So for that, usually we have a very good solution. I mean, everybody, we use fuzzy algorithms who basically compare strings, and then, you basically a typo is not a big deal. So you can basically get around that problem very easily with just, applying some common fuzzy techniques that are available. But there's other things that also happen, and our data analysts, they talk about name phenomena that can happen. For example, in organization names, you have things like legal suffixes, of course, Inc., LLC, in Germany, GmbH, GmbH and Co., KG, KG, things like that. So that needs to be kind of extracted from the name, or what we do is basically we try to extract the core component of the name, so without these legal suffixes. So that's one thing that is a very common problem, especially in organization search. Another thing is, for example, abbreviations like IBM, GE, General Electric, GE. So very often in organization names, there's these kind of abbreviations. And so how do you match? You have in your database a name, GE, and on the sanction list, maybe it could be written like General Electric. So how do you still match that name, right, in the database? How do you find that? So that's another, very common phenomena that can happen during a name search. And then there's a lot of other things. For example, when we talk about individuals, mostly nicknames. Bill, Will, Bill, William. So at the end, it's all the same name. We know that, but you know, how does your matching technology know that, right? That this is essentially basically the same name. Well, last probably but not least, but transliteration issues. And that is a very big problem, especially when we, so maybe first we should explain, you know, what is it? Transliteration issues is when you basically deal with some kind of name that is based in non-Latin script. For example, Cyrillic, you know, unfortunately, very prominent example right now, Russian names. And you have basically a you know, Latin script-based English sanction list that you deal with. So in the English list, you find the English transliterated name of that original Russian name. But Russian names can have 5, 10, 15 different variations of the name. So how do you basically tell your matching technology that, you know, these names are similar to that name in you know, Latin script or in English, without basically having more advanced technology available? And that is, you know, one of the areas I think where we also, you know, approach very well with our technology. So we have spent a lot of time into basically including, for example, transliteration lists and things like that, in order to solve that problem and basically provide a solution for our customers that really helps them. And yeah, this is also a very important problem, because when you look at least Western sanction lists, you will find that 80% or even 85% of the names are basically all names that are either based in Russian, in Chinese, or Arabic. So it's a very important problem to solve.
Right, and the transliteration is even depending on the target language, right? If you translate Vladimir Putin into English, then Vladimir is written with a V. In German, it's a W. And it's not a typo. It's not like somebody wrote the name wrong.
Exactly.
It's just a different way of writing this. And I think that the thing we should also mention is like the key KPI, so to say, here in searches. Do you have false negatives, and how many false positives do you have? Maybe you can explain what that means and how it impacts the search.
Yeah. So false negatives is first is basically you have a real match, but your system doesn't show that. So that's what we call a false negative. So for example, my example with General Electric, you send GE, and you know, your technology doesn't find that. So even though General Electric is maybe on some kind of watch list, that would be a false negative. False positive is something that you know, you send a name, you get a match, but you got also 100 other matches that are actually not that organization. And that is a very common problem, especially when you deal with more like, you know, fuzzy algorithm-based screening systems. Because what you usually do in order to not produce a false negative, you will lower the screening threshold to a certain value, and in turn it will produce many more false positives, which is also something that you don't want, because your compliance team, your resources are just, you know, limited, right? So what we do on our end is, in our product development, we always tune first for preventing false negatives, and then optimize basically the false positive reduction. And of course, a very common question here at this point, Jens, I think you can probably imagine, is what is your false positive rate, right? That is a very common question by customers, which is, you know, very difficult to answer, because now we come back to your first point, which is master data management, right? Because that really relates to that point. So if you have a really you know, not optimal data quality there, then you already basically have a problem, you know, with any kind of process that follows that. And that also heavily influences, of course, the false positive rate. So it's a question that we always get, but you know, without actually really looking at the data, it's very difficult to say. But I think we can say that we are substantial looking at a smaller false positive rate, because we have that better matching technology, that we all better, you know, this advanced matching technology that we basically apply.
Yeah, it was developed over years, and it's actually also the main driver behind why our joint sanction list screening looks like as it looks, which is on the next screen. I mean, how do you select an integration or a solution for sanctionless screening. I mean, first of all, somehow you need to make sure that sanctions and the screening meets the name in the SAP system. So the integration is one thing that you can look at. Then the name matching, because you definitely don't want false negatives and you want to reduce false positives. And okay, third point probably is the price. The integration that we have built together is like VOQUZ Labs delivers the add-on, which is in the SAP system, SAP certified add-on. And we take the name from the SAP system and send it to your system, to your environment, because this matching algorithm, I learned about it a little bit. It's super complex. It's a cluster of servers, machine learning, natural language processing, everything. Highly complex, something that you cannot do, absolutely impossible in an SAP system. But this combination, that we have this tight integration and that we can use this name matching, means I believe that we have this superior search quality that we have. And usually here at VOQUZ Labs, we say your data stays in the SAP system, no data leaves the system, but here is the exception to this rule, but it's absolutely necessary by this feature. And I also don't think, and no competitor can match this this search and name matching quality that we can deliver. And actually, as you're working with customer data somehow, I mean, people send you names of customers or vendors. How do you protect that?
Yeah, we basically do two things, if you will. Number one is, we need, of course, the data. So, somebody sends us basically a screening request. Of course, we kind of transport the data into our system in order to do the screening, right? At this point, of course, we deal with your customer data on our system. But what we do after the screening has been performed and we have basically responded to your request with a screening result, we basically hash all the parameters in that screening request. That means essentially we only store metadata of that screening request on our systems. And that basically guarantees customers that there's no data that is basically stored longer than probably 1 second on our systems, during the time that the system needs to perform the screening. So that's number one. And number two, of course, we also we are SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. So we just passed our annual audit just last week again. And that basically gives also a little bit of more assurance to our customers that from an IT security standpoint and data privacy standpoint, we are fully compliant with the common IT security standards, and we are also basically monitored and also annually audited by a neutral third party that we also comply basically to these standards.
Right, and you're also part of the EU-US data privacy framework that ensures that the handling of data across country borders, so to say, is something that happens in a safe, secure, and compliant way. So fully GDPR ready and compliant, but also fully CCPA ready and compliant. Like if it's more like US
very important, especially very important point for our US customers. Cross-border processing of data is also in the US more and more pressing issue, I would say. It started with GDPR in Europe. Now we are seeing that in the US, of course, also more and more being more restrictive on that. And customers are a little bit more cautious with what they do with their data, of course, and where they send the data to.
Right. So business partner screening, an important but also very complex thing. You have many different data sources. You can do many different checks. The name matching is complex, handling data. But I think together we've built a solution that is really simple to set up and run. And what we offer is a free proof of concept or trial. Customers can do this in their own environment. They can scan their own customers or business partners, vendors, using our technology. It takes less than a day to set up, and the results will be very convincing, I believe.
I think so too, yeah.
All right, so if you have any questions for the, we call it a quick assessment or a POC trial, please reach out. If you have any other questions, reach out or stay here for a quick question and answers.
Here we go. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar today. Jens, thanks for staying for the Q&A session. And I have a suggestion just for all of us to get a slight feel of where we all stand with business partner screening. I would like to run a short poll consisting of 4 questions. Pretty simple. No worries about the compliance. So it's anonymous. It's just, click and play so we see where we stand. Let me just start. I'm going to shut down our cameras for that, so it still stays in the stream in the recording link for the people, Jens. And I'll see you in a minute. So let me just start the first one. And you should see the question now. How do you perform sanction list screening in your company? You have 4 opportunities to answer. SAP GTS or another SAP product, a third-party product, manual custom approach, or not at all. I still see the people moving the answers. We're going to leave this open for another 5 seconds before I close it and we look at the results with each other. And then, Jens, I'm interested to hear what you think of the outcome. Closing the question now and showing the results you should see in a minute. All right. Okay. Most is manual and custom. What do you think, Jens?
Yeah, I don't know. The number of business partners might be, in many cases, really high. So maybe that's just an onboarding check. I don't know. SAP GTS, Global Trade Services, is kind of a long-established form of doing it. It's an SAP product for trade compliance. But I think would be nice to see more answers in the 2 first columns.
A higher rate. So what do you say about the 25% of people not doing anything at all? Do you consider that as quite an unnecessary high risk?
Yeah, I mean, risks are really high. We discussed it. It's financial and also operational risks that you have, and the cost of doing a screening is low. So I think that should be considered. It's an opportunity for us. We have a product for that.
Yeah, you think whoever didn't think about doing this should be thinking about doing this in the future. Let's jump to the next question. Give me a moment to start it up. And you should see it in a moment. There it goes. Do you test your sanction screening solution for false negatives? So do you actually make sure it doesn't deliver false negatives, that it works properly? I'm going to leave this open for another 7 seconds from now.
Yeah, so how one can do this is you seed some names in your business partner data where you know that it's a hit, and just to make sure that you have kind of insights and monitoring whether the screening works. Because running the solution and not knowing what it does, then that's a bad idea.
Yeah. But it might be the case. That's why I entered it there. So it's not just a yes or no. Maybe I don't know how to. So let's have a look at that, what the people answered. I'm going to close it in a second. Let me just screenshot it from my system. Closing now and displaying the results so we can have a look at it and see. 67% wouldn't know how to out of our attendees here. So this might be an opportunity to show how. What do you think about that? Does it surprise you?
Not really, but maybe just an idea that the viewers can take home, so to say. Make a list of names that you know are on a sanction list that is relevant for you. Maybe even add names like variations of names. We discussed that, typos and so on and so forth. Yeah, test the quality of the solution just by adding those names.
As a test, I was just about to ask you how should they research, who should they put on, but you're actually talking about how to sort of test it to see whether it works or not. I get you now.
Yeah.
Get it. Let's have a look at the next one. You should see it on the screen. The question is, are too many false positives a problem in your organization? So seeing pop-ups with, this might be an issue, and then for it to turn out it's actually not an issue, is that a problem in your company? I'm going to leave this open for about 7 seconds.
So, I mean, this is also something that depends on the screening approach. If you kind of start screening with a new solution that you implement, maybe then you do a full scan of all your business partners. That might be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And even with a very, very low false positive rate, that might mean you get hundreds or so, or even thousands of results. And they need to be sifted through more or less manually. So in these kind of situations, it's definitely a problem. For transaction-based monitoring, I think if the search or name matching algorithm is properly fine-tuned, then it should be very well manageable and a small number of results, false positive results, I mean.
Yeah, well, no one is not unsure how to do it, which is good. So you've explained why there could be a 33% of no's in there. So people seem to be aware. Let's have a look at the next one. And it's the last question of the query. Thanks for taking part, by the way. Let me just show it on the screen, and you should see it now. Does a dedicated team or your finance department deal with sanctions and trade compliance? So who does it? Who's in there? Who's taking care of this? It's the dedicated team in your case, or the finance department, both in some sort of a cooperation, or none at all? Let's see.
So usually in like regulated industries, financial services and so on and so forth, you have really even large teams that deal with these topics. KYC and AML is a big issue in all of them. Some other industries, they might have a fractional trade compliance officer or sanctions compliance officer. I think this really depends on the industry and maybe even size of organization.
Let's have a look what the people say, actually, how it is in their cases. You should see the result by now. And okay, there are some who are actually splitting that work in between the finance department and the dedicated team. It might be one person who's sort of taking care of it and then still having someone from finance to recheck it. What do you think?
Yeah, and you have different types of business partners, right? I mean, for trade compliance, usually you have a person that has a different skills profile also and understands what types of business fall under certain restrictions, trade restrictions, let's say. And for purely financial transactions, then this competence is in the finance team, I believe.
All right, thanks for taking part. We have a bit of an overview where we all stand, at least in this webinar. I mean, hang on, let me just turn on our cameras for a second before we go on with the questions. I'm going to trigger yours, Jens, as well. You should see a pop-up somewhere that you can confirm. Yeah, here you go. There we go. And obviously, I mean, people coming into our webinars and reading our stuff, especially the brochures you and your team have prepared, would be aware. So asking people in a webinar like this, just been listening to about the importance of business partner screening, it would actually surprise me to get realistic no answers about the topic. But let's jump over to the questions. I've got two sources, excuse me, doing my multitasking here. And the first one says, does a BPS solution have any relation with GRC? Does it have anything to do with it, basically?
I mean, I believe it does. I mean, the term GRC, I mean, was coined by a consultant, I don't know when, 20 years ago or so. It comprises, in particular, governance, risk, compliance. That's the term, and you need to comply with trade laws and sanction laws. So definitely falls in that category. SAP, on the other hand, has taken the term and has put some products into their GRC portfolio, and some other products are not part of what they call GRC. So it's kind of a maybe vague definition. What is GRC? But definitely that's part of that.
Jumping over to another one, and it says, it's a how-to question, I would say. How do you access data in the SAP system from that cloud application sanctions? Is it a B2B app?
Yeah, so we have a plugin, or SAP calls it an add-on, that you import into the SAP system. That's one of the ways that SAP partners can deliver functionality that enhance the standard SAP functionality. And that add-on reads data from the tables in the SAP system and sends them to an API. Sanctions.io is a cloud-hosted SaaS service. So we send the name there, receive a response, and have a case management system also in the SAP system directly. The advantage also of having it in the SAP system is that if you see the results that you have a potential hit, you can directly click, for instance, on the name of the vendor or the customer that you have in your system. You will see the full details. You have all the master data available. And so that makes the investigation easier. And you have an integrated system, all information available, also full audit trail. When did you do a scan? What was the result? Why did somebody approve something? Why did he decide it's a false positive, and so on and so forth. So it's an audit ready solution. And that's also important because in many cases also the external auditor will want to understand how the screening was performed and what the results are. And if you have this integrated system, including a case management system, then that's easy to show the proof.
Thanks for that, for the insight. Jumping to the next one. And it actually, I mean, you've mentioned it that you can do that in order to test your system. But the question goes, can I add my own blacklist to the screening? And probably how?
Yeah, you can. So to use this solution, you have a user account, so to say, with Sanctions.io, and you can go there and maintain your own blacklists. So you just upload, I believe it's an Excel file with the names and maybe other information such as country. And then this will be added as a data source to the screening process.
Why should you do that? Is it out of your experience with a certain, who's actually not on an official blacklist, with a certain partner you had problems with in the back, and you just want to make sure we're not going back into that trouble again?
Yeah, it's not sanctionless screening because you're not sanctioning somebody in that sense, but yeah, might be a customer who didn't pay, or maybe a vendor who is unreliable, and you don't want to have them in your as a business partner anymore.
In your universe.
Yeah.
I see that being it for this time. If you can think of any more questions that you maybe didn't want to address in this round, please feel free to send us an email to labs@voquuzlabs.com or reach out to us directly. Jens is pretty present on LinkedIn if you prefer that line of communication. Wherever you find us and wherever you put in your question, you will get an answer. Other than that, also, let me just show this really quickly. You can find top-level information also for your colleagues on our website. And I just want to give you a bit of an overview on the navigation. So you should be seeing the screen now. And if you go to products and REMQ, you have, for all the people who like it on the top level, really short form of information input. Have a look at the video. It gives you an overview what it can do. You see different types of brochures here. If your focus is on fraud prevention, it might differ actually from country to country, from region to region, what sort of your focus is. Compliance, have a look at it. And Jens has mentioned it at the end of the webinar as well. The best way to see whether this makes sense, what we're talking about here, is actually to go for a quick assessment and find out whether what we say works, really works, and if it works for you, and how easy it is to install. How easy is it to install, and how easy is it to perform, Jens?
Oh, it's very easy. No, it's just importing the report file, and that's it. Yeah.
That's it. Okay. Okay.
And then
I will say press the play button. Yeah, I like that. Okay. thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Jens for staying with us. Any last words from you? As a not last words in general, but for now.
Thank you everyone for your time. Look forward to reach out, and thank you, Stefan.
Perfect. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.